I'm sorry, Emily, the attorney said, not meeting my eyes. Your name isn't in the will.
I didn't understand.
I sat across the polished mahogany table in my father's favorite suit, the one he wore to every town hall, every charity dinner, every graduation. I wore it like armor, like I was showing up for battle. But I didn't expect to be the one getting wounded. Across from me, my Uncle Charles leaned back in his chair like a king surveying land he had already claimed. His wedding ring clicked loudly against the crystal glass he held. He hadn't even cried at the funeral. The estate, the land, the house, the business, everything, all transferred into his name like I never existed. But I started. Charles interrupted, smooth and cold. Your father was very clear in his intentions. He wanted the estate to stay with the family. My hands shook in my lap. I was the family. I was his daughter. He raised me alone. I cared for him in hospice. I slept beside his hospital bed when Charles wouldn't even visit. And yet here I was, erased with a signature. I was born on a warm July evening in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to a mother I never got to remember and a father who never let me feel her absence. My mom died when I was 2, taken by a sudden aneurysm that left my father hollow-eyed and broken, but never absent. From the moment she left us, he poured everything into raising me right. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't post about being a girl dad or make grand speeches. He just showed up. Every morning, every night, rain or shine. I never realized how rare that was. Growing up, it was always just the two of us in the small, clapboard house off Lantern Ridge Road. He taught high school chemistry and ran a modest landscaping business during the summers to keep things afloat. He wasn't rich, but he was respected. When we walked into the local diner, people greeted him by name. Hey, Mr. Carson, and asked for gardening tips or stories about the latest senior prank at East Chapel High. And then there was Uncle Charles, his younger brother by 4 years. Charles Carson had the same bone structure, but none of the backbone. He lived in Charlotte, drove a silver Lexus he couldn't afford, and worked in real estate development, which often meant selling property he didn't technically own or getting bailed out of zoning lawsuits. He wore expensive watches and had a voice like molasses, always saying the right thing and meaning none of it. He visited twice a year, once for Thanksgiving and again when tax season loomed and he needed help with some paperwork. My father always welcomed him with a cautious half-hug and a cautious smile. He never turned him away, but I could see the difference in his eyes. As a child, I used to think Charles was glamorous. He brought me plastic necklaces from Miami and called me Little Empress. I'd twirl in my Sunday dress when he arrived, hoping for his attention. He'd lift me up, give me a $20 bill, and then disappear for another 6 months. When I was 12, I overheard my father arguing with him on the porch, something about unpaid loans and forged documents. That was the first time I saw my dad raise his voice. I peeked through the blinds, and for a second, Charles looked genuinely afraid. But nothing ever came of it. My father never pressed charges. He never exposed him.
Why?
I asked one evening, months later, when the house was quiet and we were playing cards on the porch. He looked at me for a long time before replying. Because sometimes protecting your family doesn't mean excusing what they do. It just means not becoming like them. That stuck with me. But I didn't understand the full weight of it until years later. When I was 17, my father got diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's. It came on slow, a tremor in his right hand, then a stiffness in his walk. By the time I graduated high school, he was using a cane. I skipped prom to take him to his neurologist appointment in Raleigh. He insisted I go, but I knew he needed someone to drive. And besides, I didn't want to dance in a gym under fake stars while he sat alone at home, watching reruns of Frasier. College was never a question. I applied to UNC Chapel Hill to stay close to home. I worked part-time at a local bookstore, and every Thursday, I'd cook him his favorite, blackened catfish with sweet potato mash. We had our rhythm. I was proud of it. While other kids were out drinking or studying abroad, I was setting reminders for his medications and reading estate law at midnight just in case. I wanted to understand how things worked. He laughed when I printed out a DIY will template. You think I'm going somewhere? He teased. No, I replied, serious. But I want to make sure that when the time comes, everything's clear. When he finally agreed to draft a will, we went to the local attorney together, a soft-spoken woman named Valerie who wore pearls and always smelled like lavender. My father told her plainly, "Everything goes to Emily." I sat across from him, half embarrassed, half honored. It felt awkward to talk about inheritances when the person you loved most was still alive, still laughing, still fighting. But that was the kind of man he was. Responsible. Intentional. I watched him sign the first draft with a steady hand. So when the final will, the one presented at the attorney's office after his funeral, had my name completely removed, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. The last few months before his death were fogged by medication. He had a fall in March that put him in a rehab facility temporarily. I visited every day, even when he didn't remember my name. But Charles? Charles suddenly became the model brother. He showed up weekly, brought him fancy food, and even hired a private nurse for a few days. I didn't trust it, but I didn't interfere. I wanted to believe people could change. I wanted to believe maybe he was trying to make amends. What I didn't realize was that during that exact time, while I was changing bedpans and reading My Father to Kill a Mockingbird, Charles was meeting with another attorney in Charlotte. A man named Greg Withers, whose name I'd come to memorize like a curse. That man drafted a new will, supposedly under my father's direction, but without my knowledge or Valerie's. The signature was messy. The language was cold. In it, everything, the house, the land, the business accounts, was willed to the only remaining capable male heir of the Carson bloodline. Charles. There was no mention of me. No explanation. Just absence. After the will was read, and the estate transferred, people started changing. Cousins stopped returning calls. My father's business partner gently told me he'd love to help, but Charles now had full control. I wasn't listed anywhere in the LLC. I went to the house 1 week later to pick up a few photo albums and maybe his old gardening gloves. They still smelled like him. The locks were changed. I spent nights crying into the same blanket my father wrapped around me after my first breakup. It still had his scent, a mix of cedar and lemon balm. But the sadness gave way to something sharper. Fire. I started rereading every article, every estate planning blog I had saved. I started requesting documents, making calls, filing records requests. I found the notary who had supposedly witnessed the second will. She lived 3 counties away and had no recollection of the visit. Her license had expired 6 months earlier. Something wasn't right. But before I took action, I had to be sure. Because when you're a woman standing alone against a man like Charles, with his lawyers, his suits, and his charm, people don't give you the benefit of the doubt. You have to build your case like you're already on trial. I didn't just lose my father. I lost the life we built together. After the will was read, I spent weeks in limbo. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat more than dry toast. It was like my body understood I'd been erased long before my mind could catch up. The real estate office that had always addressed me as Miss Carson now treated me like a stranger. I reached out to Valerie, the original attorney who had helped my father draft his first will. Her voicemail was full. I finally sent her a letter, formal, typed, with a certified return receipt. No reply. Meanwhile, Charles acted like everything was settled. His emails were cold and condescending, always written in third person, as if I were a client, not his niece. The estate has been properly executed in accordance with legal documents provided at the time of Mr. Carson's passing. At this time, we are not entertaining further inquiries. Office of C.S. Carson. No greeting. No, Emily. Just bureaucracy. One afternoon, I tried to contact the care facility where Dad spent his final weeks. I wanted to talk to his nurse, Mia, the only one he trusted. The receptionist paused. You're the niece, right? The one they warned us about. My breath caught. Excuse me? She hesitated. Sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. We were told not to disclose anything without legal clearance from Mr. Carson. Mr. Carson. Not my father. Charles. It was raining that day. I remember because I sat in my parked car for hours, staring at the wipers dragging across the glass like a metronome. Everything felt surreal. My father's laugh still echoed in my mind, the deep, raspy chuckle he used when I beat him at Scrabble. His old toolbox was probably still in the shed, but I wasn't allowed in. His favorite rocking chair, the one he swore had healing magic, now belonged to a man who never loved him. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was angry. But anger meant nothing unless I could do something with it. I started requesting public records, every version of my father's will, property transfer logs, even the deed changes filed after his death. What I found made my stomach twist. There were 2 wills filed within 6 months of each other. The first one, notarized by Valerie's office, left the entire estate to me. The second, the one Charles used, had a different notary, different witness, and was missing certain legal codes required under North Carolina probate law. And the signature? It didn't match. Not even close. My father's hand had trembled badly toward the end, but even then, his penmanship had a distinct slant. The second signature looked forged, steady, bold, nothing like the man I'd spoon-fed applesauce and held through shaking nights. Still, forgery cases are hard to prove. Courts don't like emotional daughters trying to contest wills. I knew that. Everyone I spoke to warned me not to waste money on a case I'd lose. Be realistic, Emily, one probate consultant told me over Zoom. Do you have any evidence beyond your personal belief? I wanted to scream. My entire life was evidence. A week later, I received an email from Charles. Subject line: let it go.
Body.
Emily, your father made his decision. You need to stop dragging this through the mud. If you continue harassing my office and contacting people with baseless accusations, I'll be forced to take legal action. Let it go. Move on with your life. Charles Carson.
Move on.
As if this was a bad breakup. As if I hadn't spent every Christmas of my life helping Dad string lights across the porch while Charles sent fruit baskets. I didn't respond, but I made a folder. I labeled it Proof of Theft. I called one of my old professors from law school, Professor Dana Riggs, who taught estate litigation. She had always believed in my potential, even when I dropped out during Dad's health crisis. I explained everything: the timeline, the forged documents, the personality of Charles. She didn't interrupt once. At the end, she said, "Come to Atlanta. I have someone I want you to meet." That weekend, I drove 4 hours with my box of evidence and a heart full of fire. She introduced me to a legal aid attorney named Jackie Samuels, a sharp, determined woman in her 40s who took one look at my file and said, "This isn't just sketchy. This is criminal." Together, we began building a case. Quietly, meticulously. Jackie hired a handwriting analyst who compared both signatures across multiple documents. The expert concluded with high probability that the second signature was forged. Then we pulled visitor logs from the rehab facility. On the date the second will was supposedly signed, my father had been sedated with morphine following a bad fall. He couldn't have signed his name if he tried. Still, we needed more. Then came the final slap in the face. A family gathering, a cousin's wedding, to which I wasn't invited. A mutual friend sent me photos. Charles standing at the head table, giving a speech, toasting with champagne in one hand, the other wrapped around the shoulder of a man who had once called my father the most honest man in North Carolina. And then came the caption: "So proud of Uncle Charles for honoring the Carson legacy, keeping it in the family." I felt like I was drowning. That night, I called the friend who sent me the photo and asked, "Did anyone even mention my dad?" She paused. Honestly,
No.
it was like he never existed. That's when something in me broke. Not in the way you break when you give up. In the way a seed breaks open before it grows. They wanted me to stay quiet. Stay erased. Be the good girl. The obedient niece. But they underestimated one thing. I had nothing left to lose. And I wasn't going to fight like them, with lies, with charm, with manipulation. I was going to fight with truth.
Publicly.
I didn't send another email to Charles. I didn't call Valerie again. I didn't beg, plead, or post a single thing on Facebook. Instead, I went silent. It wasn't out of surrender, it was strategy. The truth is, when you stop reacting, people get uncomfortable. They want your outrage. They want your noise. It makes them feel important, powerful. But silence? That makes them paranoid. So I vanished and started planning. I moved out of my father's neighborhood. Found a small apartment in Durham with just enough light to grow succulents and just enough silence to think clearly. I canceled the final utilities that were still in my name from Dad's house. I closed his old checking account and shredded the debit card I'd held onto like a relic. I donated his clothes, except the flannel shirt he wore every fall when we went apple picking. That one stayed with me. I deleted every number in my phone that had the last name Carson. Cousins.
Aunts.
Even my half-sister from my father's first marriage, who had stayed silent through the whole ordeal. If they hadn't spoken for me, they had already spoken against me. But what I did next wasn't about cutting people off. It was about reclaiming my time, my identity, my peace. I started waking up early. I enrolled in online estate law courses, ones I never got to finish when Dad got sick. I'd pour a cup of black coffee, light a candle, and sit down at my desk like I was training for war. I was. Except my weapons were facts.
Case law.
Chain of title documents. I began writing everything down. Each moment of the betrayal, each legal discrepancy, every memory of my father saying, "One day, all this will be yours." He hadn't lied. They just stole it. And I intended to take it back, legally, publicly, and without ever raising my voice. My silence wasn't unnoticed. 3 weeks after my last email to Charles, he sent me a text. "Emily, heard you've moved. Just wanted to check in. Hope you're okay." No subject. No apology. No mention of the estate. I didn't reply. He sent another one 3 days later. "It doesn't have to be like this. We're family." Still, I stayed quiet. Because here's the thing. The moment I stopped asking to be seen, I became impossible to ignore. That's when the emails started coming in, not from family but from people in town. Dad's old accountant reached out. I know it's not my place, but I saw the property filings. That second will, it doesn't sit right with me. If you ever need a witness statement, I'm here. Then a retired judge from Dad's Rotary Club. "I knew your father. He was clear about who he trusted. If you're pursuing this legally, I'd be honored to review anything you need." And then the nurse, Mia, found me on LinkedIn. "Emily, I kept a journal during my time at the facility. I noted every visit, every medication dose. I also documented Charles's presence, and your father's condition the day that will was supposedly signed. He was barely conscious. If this helps you in any way, I'll testify." I stared at her message for a long time before replying.
Thank you, Mia.
"You have no idea what this means to me." She wrote back almost instantly. "Actually, I do. Your father talked about you every day." I printed everything, organized it into binders, color-coded tabs, chronological affidavits, medical logs, notarized discrepancies, handwriting analyses. I didn't need noise. I had evidence. And I had integrity, something Charles had never respected and definitely never expected. For the first time since my father's funeral, I felt like I could breathe. Not because I had won, but because I had chosen how I would fight. Quietly, deliberately, and on my own terms. There's a specific kind of power in withdrawal. It confuses people who rely on drama to dominate. Charles was used to manipulation, to negotiations done with pressure and threats. My silence made him nervous. He started calling mutual friends. "Is Emily okay?" he'd ask. One of them, a woman named Sharon who once worked with my father, forwarded me the voicemail he left her. "She's digging. I can feel it.
Tell her to stop."
There's no point in dragging this through court. It'll just hurt her more. He was wrong. I was already done hurting. Now, I was building. One night, I sat alone in my apartment with Dad's flannel shirt wrapped around my shoulders and my laptop open. I clicked submit on the formal probate dispute. Filed the motion to invalidate the forged will. Attached 37 pages of supporting evidence. It was done. And I hadn't said a single word to him. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in my childhood bedroom, now cold and stripped of memories, since Charles had ordered everything unnecessary to be packed away. I clutched the last thing I had of my father's, his old leather journal. It smelled like the cedarwood from his workshop. That's when I remembered something. Dad used to write everything down. His schedules, his projects, his notes from meetings, especially the ones with Charles. I opened the journal and flipped through it. There it was. An entry from 6 months before he died. Charles suggested a new asset strategy again.
Doesn't feel right.
He's pushing me to amend the trust, says it's for Emily's protection, but I don't trust his tone. We'll talk to Michelle, our old attorney, next week. Michelle. Not the shady lawyer Charles had hired for the will reading. My father had suspected something. This was my window. The next morning, I drove to Michelle Yates' office, gripping that journal like a weapon. She was surprised to see me, but once I showed her Dad's entry, her face went pale. He never came back, she said. I thought maybe he changed his mind, but I still have the draft he wanted to sign, naming you sole heir. I felt fire roar in my chest. Charles had intercepted it. He must have convinced Dad to use his own lawyer, pressured him in his final days when his body was weak, but his mind still sharp. My father hadn't betrayed me. He had fought for me. Now it was my turn to fight for him. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Michelle. We combed through the trust documents, subpoenaed Charles's lawyer for the final version of the will, and reviewed every financial transaction leading up to Dad's death. What we found was worse than I imagined. Charles had secretly moved business assets into shell accounts. He had filed amendments using forged initials. Some papers even had inconsistencies in signatures that screamed fraud. Armed with Michelle's legal team, we filed a formal estate challenge. But I didn't stop there. I started documenting everything. Every lie Charles told the community, every fake press release about the family legacy he now represented. I reached out to Dad's old business partners, neighbors, church members, anyone who knew the man my father really was. And then, I planned the biggest move of all. I booked a speaking slot at the town's annual Founders Gala. It was always my father's pride and joy. Charles had taken the stage the last 2 years, giving smug speeches about heritage and sacrifice. But this time, it would be me on that stage. And I wasn't coming quietly. The night of the Founders Gala arrived, cloaked in the kind of buzz that electrifies a small town like Durham Springs. Everyone who was anyone was there, dressed in their best, sipping champagne and gossiping over hors d'oeuvres. And of course, Charles stood at the center of it all, basking in the false glow of admiration. He wore one of my father's old tailored suits. That alone almost made me storm the stage early. But I didn't. I waited. I waited until the room went dim and the MC announced, "Please welcome this year's legacy speaker, Emily Reese." I stepped onto that stage with my head held high, heels clicking like a countdown on the polished wood. The murmurs started almost immediately. Some smiled, surprised. Some whispered, confused. Charles, however, froze.
Good.
I took a breath and looked out over the crowd. Most of you knew my father, Jonathan Reese. You knew him as the man who helped build this town's economy, who paid people fairly, who gave second chances, and built trust the way others build fences with effort. Applause. Warm and genuine. I held up my hand. But what many of you don't know is what happened after he passed. What was taken. What was silenced. I turned and pointed directly at Charles. My uncle, Charles Reese, lied to you. He lied to all of us. He manipulated my father in his final days, stole his estate through forged documents, and erased my name from the legacy my father worked his whole life to build.
Gasps.
A few people looked at Charles. One woman even stood up and walked out. I continued, unflinching. I have the evidence. Drafts of the original trust my father intended. Emails, logs, and journal entries. We've filed a formal challenge in court. And more importantly, we've filed charges. Charles, you're not just a thief, you're a fraud. And your time pretending to be a man of honor ends tonight. The silence was deafening. Charles stammered from his table. This is slander. I held up my father's journal. This is truth. I walked off stage without waiting for permission, applause, or closure. Because I didn't need them. The room erupted, some shouting, some whispering, others filming. But I didn't look back. That night, I became more than Jonathan Rhys's daughter. I became his voice. The days after the gala were a whirlwind. I woke up to dozens of messages, articles, and interview requests. What I had done wasn't just personal anymore. It had become public reckoning. The town's Facebook groups were flooded with support. Some even shared stories about how my dad had helped them years ago, stories I'd never heard before. But the biggest moment came 3 days later, inside a cold courtroom that smelled like dust and justice. Charles sat across from me, pale and fidgeting. His lawyer tried every trick in the book, but the evidence was airtight. My father's journal laid everything bare: dates, signatures, changes in the trust, even entries where my father expressed his confusion over what Charles was doing to the paperwork. The judge didn't hesitate. The estate was returned to me. Every acre, every dollar, every piece of my father's legacy. Charles didn't say a word as the gavel struck. He just sat there, his empire of lies crumbling in silence. Outside the courthouse, I didn't give a statement. I didn't pose for cameras. I just closed my eyes and let the summer sun hit my face. For the first time in years, I felt my father beside me, not in memory but in peace. That night, I drove out to the house he built, the one I'd been locked out of for years. I stood in the doorway and took a deep breath. It smelled like old books and cedar, like childhood and comfort. I walked into his study and sat in his chair. No tears, just warmth. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "I brought it all back." The house didn't answer, but I didn't need it to. The stillness said enough. If you're watching this, maybe you've been betrayed by family. Maybe someone you trusted broke something sacred: your heart, your future, your legacy. I want you to know something. You are not powerless. It took me years to realize that grief doesn't mean silence. That honoring someone's memory sometimes means fighting louder than you ever thought possible. I didn't reclaim my father's estate just for the land or the money. I reclaimed his truth. I reclaimed my own voice. And if you're in a place right now where you feel small, dismissed, or erased, I see you. Your pain is valid, but so is your power. I was just a girl with a box of my dad's journals and a heart full of ache. But I stood up. I faced my uncle. I stood in front of that crowd and said, "This ends here. You can too." Don't let anyone tell you what you deserve. Don't let them bury your story under lies. Rise. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, rise anyway. Because truth has a strange way of echoing back. And when it finally does, it shakes the walls of even the grandest lies. Thank you for listening to my story. If it gave you even a spark of courage, then every second of that fight was worth it. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about becoming who I was always meant to be. And now, I live free. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I took it back.